So much needs fixing around the globe.
Do you draw the line
and next door?
You and I, all that's broken on the river.
It is time for We Act Radio's Conversations Toward Repair. Welcome. This is We Act Radio, broadcasting from land that was once home to the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people, who were displaced within about 40 years of Europeans first arriving on this land, and historic Anacostia, where the radio station is located, is again facing displacement as new building, including more upmarket apartments and more upmarket retail eateries are coming into the area of right around the radio station. And so we are seeing yet another stage of displacement. I am Virginia Avniel Spatz, and this is a program I'm calling Conversations Toward Repair. My intention in this still new series is to focus on undoing violence by exploring the many kinds of violence embedded in our city, nation, and globe that often go unremarked, and by highlighting many ways of building peace. In the short span of this program, we have talked about things like gun violence, we've talked about the violence of racism, we've talked about other kinds of systemic violence that isn't always understood as violence, and ways that we can work toward undoing some of that and working toward coalitions that will help us get out of this sort of downward spiral that we're in. And today's program is a departure even from the evolving series that I've been offering, in that I don't have a guest with me today. Instead, I am live here because I want to make sure that at least one piece of the, there were 50 some pieces of legislation that were considered by the DC Council yesterday in a 12-hour sort of marathon session. And many of them deserve way more attention than we are probably going to end up giving them as this session rushes to its conclusion, as is pretty common. There's one piece that I just want to make sure we do not skip over, and we'll talk about it in more detail soon, I hope. I'm hoping that next week or the week after we can have a more organized discussion about this. But in the 12 hours and the many pieces of legislation that were undertaken yesterday, there was something that is hyper-local. It's about a piece of property that is about 4 blocks from my house. And it is maybe about a mile and a half from the We Act Radio station. The west side of the river, though, the We Act Radio is on the east side, and this property is on the west side of the river. And the disposition of this property has been an issue for the community for decades. When I was a reporter for the Hill Rag and East of the River newspapers, I covered issues with this building. I'll go ahead and say that the name of the property, which is the Eastern Boys and Girls Club at 261 17th Street Southeast. But I want to stress, before getting into the details of it, that while this is a hyper-local and a very specific thing, it is also indicative of a pattern that we see throughout DC. It's been happening way too much, and it's happening in other places in the country. And I am including it in this series about violence that we don't always recognize, because it is something that will be put forward as progress, even though it is rolling over many issues that the community really needs addressed. And instead, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen. And we need to take a look at some of these examples. So last night, about 10:30 at night, after at least 10 hours of deliberation on various matters, the bill called PR 240839 was raised. And this is a disposition of land that belongs to us, to district taxpayers at this point. They're going to give it to a developer for a purchase price of $1, which is not that uncommon. This happens frequently enough. And in addition to that, we learned that there will be more benefits given to the developer for building this new project, which is being advertised more or less as affordable housing, although hardly any of it is affordable to people who have lived in DC for a long time. So this PR 240839 was considered at about 10:30 last night, and 3 council members spoke about it in that portion. And I'll tell you what they had to say, and I will provide a link so that you can look up their remarks. The discussion did not take long. You can hear them all directly. The first person to speak was our council member, Louis George, who said that she cautioned against voting for this because she'd been hearing from community members who said there wasn't enough community support or input on this particular project, and that this Boys and Girls Club had one. It's got a swimming pool, a gym, rooms that were used for dance, and used to have a room for shooting pool. It was a center of activity when I first moved to DC. It has been empty for a very long time. And she pointed out that older members of the community, especially Black residents who have lived here for a long time and who have strong associations with that property, want to see it used in a way that actually provides a space for our young people who have so few places to safely hang out. And she also mentioned that this particular project has zero affordable housing at 30% or less of the median family income for the area. So while it can be legally called affordable, it is affordable at a rate which is much higher than a lot of people in the district. The median is very high for our area and doesn't reflect the income of people who are longtime residents, especially Black people living east of the river and living in what is now called Hill East. So that was Councilmember Louis George's remarks. And then Councilmember Alyssa Silverman spoke, and she spoke to some of the fiscal aspects of this, which maybe not everybody knows, that the property was purchased by the District of Columbia, along with some other Boys and Girls Club properties, including Jelliff in Georgetown, for $20 million. And she points out that the district borrowed that money, took a loan, and that we are paying interest every year since 2010 for that purchase. And now we're going to sell it to a developer for $1. And in addition to that, she said we are giving $3 million to the developer for, I'm not sure the exact specifics of that, but we are not just giving away property that belongs to the district and to the community for $1. We are also giving them a grant of some kind. And she spoke about the lack of affordable housing. 11 of the units are affordable at 50 to 80% of the median family income, and 24 are 20% more than the median family income. And as Councilmember Lewis George had already pointed out, none are for the lowest affordable rate, which is 0 to 30% of the area median. And so this is not contributing to affordable housing, even though that's supposed to be its point. And there will be 2,000 square feet of community serving space. I don't know what that means, but it is replacing. Now, this building has been empty a long time, but it had a swimming pool and it had a gym and it had meeting space and it was a community center. And now there'll be 2,000 square feet of community serving space, whatever that means. Councilmember Allen, who is the Ward 6 council member, and the property was located in Ward 6 for many years. With the redistricting, it's now in Ward 7. He spoke and pointed out that it has been empty for 15 years and that there have been attempts to redevelop this property that didn't succeed. He said it's an incredibly difficult building to do anything with. It is up on a hill and the swimming pool has not been habitable for decades. He pointed out that there are now pigeons who make it home. It has been empty and decrepit for a long time, but it was once a community center. He said the community wants to have it back in service to the community, and he doesn't think it's accurate that there was no community input. The developer that has chosen was second in line from an RFP process from 5 years ago. The original choice fell through. And he said that it is really important to the community. The community has asked to see this property move forward. And in the earlier committee hearing, or the committee discussion of this bill, which was about a week before, Councilmember Allen also spoke then about what the development would and would not do, and again stressed that the community wants it back in productive use, which of course is true. And he said, I will note, just for the record, that one of the things the community talked a lot about was wanting to see multi-generational housing. And here's the breakdown. It's 8 one-bedrooms, 14 one-bedrooms with a den, 11 two-bedrooms, and 2 three-bedrooms. Councilmember Allen goes on to say, I don't know if that really represents a lot of multi-generational housing, since most of these are one-bedrooms, but then he voted for the project as is and said he wanted to note that, but he was voting for it anyway. And he mentioned that he wants to work with developers on that community serving space. Councilmember McDuffie, who was chairing the Business and Economic Development Committee at the time, said that he also was concerned about the community space and was talking to developers about it. He mentioned the multi-generational housing issue and said, your interest is aligned with mine, but then both of them voted for it without multi-generational housing. And he also mentioned the study that the deputy mayor for economic development did a while back on the need for multi-generational or multi-bedroom apartments in the city. And he said, well, that's kind of more on the rental side, and this is going to be condos. So I don't know, I guess it doesn't matter. And at that committee meeting, Councilmember Gray did speak. He wasn't at the vote last night because it was at 10:30 and he was absent for all of those votes, having been advised by his doctor that sitting for more than 8 hours in a council hearing wasn't good for anyone's health, and for his in particular. But he was at the committee meeting and said that he appreciated the work done and moving forward with it. And everyone who was present, Councilmember Che, Councilmember Gray, Councilmember Allen, and Councilmember McDuffie, all voted for the project, the committee report, which then led to the vote last night, And the vote last night was in favor of this project, with Councilmember Pinto absent, Councilmember Gray absent, Councilmember Louis George voted no, Councilmember Silverman voted no, Councilmember Trayon White voted present, and everyone else voted yes. So this 35 residential units for sale, of which 11 are considered affordable, although affordable at a rate that really isn't affordable to most of our neighbors, is now scheduled to go ahead. And I also want to point out that the DC Council now has, we voted for this some time back. We have an office, the Council Office of Racial Equity, that's supposed to do a report and find out how various pieces of legislation will affect Black and brown people, Indigenous people, and low-income people in the district. And their report said we were given this less than a week before the report was needed. There's no way we can do this. We can't tell you whether it will positively or negatively affect Black and brown people and Indigenous people. And so our report is, we don't know. This happens frequently with developers' propositions. We have given away to Patterson Place, I think about 2 years ago, for $1 with the same kind of, the report said we can't possibly tell you if this will positively or negatively impact the most vulnerable people in our city. We can't tell you if it's going to be promoting racial equity or doing the opposite. The committee and then the council just shrug and vote for it anyway. So we have this whole system in place that simply doesn't ever function in a way that will allow for serious consideration of racial equity. And so that is one of the things that happened at last night's DC Council meeting. And it is not, unfortunately, it is not an unusual kind of a thing for our council. From what I understand, I haven't studied it greatly, but from what I understand, it's not an unusual thing for the rest of the country either. Very often we are convinced to give away major community assets. In this case, it's a piece of property that had once been a community center and now will end up probably being a bunch of condos with maybe a little corner that the community can use for something. It is a community asset, and we have been struggling about it. Councilmember Allen is, correct to say that many of us have been following this for many years, and I confess that I'm a little out of the loop. I hadn't been following it most recently, but I was working as a reporter for this very hyper local area in 2008, I think it was, when community members had formed a coalition called Neighbors United that was trying to take the property and develop something so that it could be put into community use. There have been many owners, and there's been lots of partnerships that came to nothing. Back then, the Neighbors United was working with Douglas Development. Doug Jamal helped in the bid process, and I'm not entirely sure what happened back then, but the building was constructed in 1937. It has been empty since 2007, and it has been crumbling since then. And there are some reports on Hill Rag's website from more recently, when the previous, not the current proposal, which will go to the developer that is called Morningstar. I think that is their name. They're called Morningstar, and there was a Morningstar Community Development. They were the second in line in an earlier RFP process, And there's some articles on the Hill Rags website about the ANC, the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, discussing the previous incarnation, which was supposed to be 50 affordable units and some 100% affordable senior rentals. And as Councilmember Allen explained in the council hearing and in the committee meeting, the funding for that fell apart, and so they went to the second choice in the RFP process. But even back in October 2020, the ANC, which was then, things have been redistricted, which was then in charge of weighing in on what would happen to the Boys and Girls Club, was saying, well, we don't really object to this particular proposal, but we didn't get sufficient time to interact with the proposal or bring it to the community. And that was 2 years ago. And there have been hearings. There have been some attempts, like in the last month. This proposal was first introduced to the council in July, and the hearing was held in November. And then the committee meeting was a week ago, and then the vote was last night. So this, and then there is this sense of urgency. We have to hurry up. It will lose this chance. We've got to go ahead. The community wants it. But the community wants it is this is where I think, and this is my own personal response here, because as I said, I do not have other voices to officially bring in for this conversation today. We'll get to it as soon as we can. This is where I think that this form of violence is not always recognized, because it is older Black residents who are not just emotionally attached to the property because they played pool there when they were teenagers, but people who really want to see this community asset returned to community use, because there is a need for young people. Eastern High School is only a couple of blocks away, and we are constantly in a battle about how newer residents, mostly whiter, wealthier residents, are looking at the Eastern High School kids, who are mostly Black, and of course they're younger, and they get out of school and maybe they're loud, or there might be fights. There's a lot of pointing the finger at Eastern High School students, saying that they are somehow a problem in the neighborhood. And the Boys and Girls Club was once a place where kids who were coming out of Eastern High School or the local middle school would be able to go and swim and take gym class and take karate class, and they could just hang out, shoot pool, they could sit and talk with their friends. There were a lot of things happening at that facility when I first moved here, and there is very little place for young people to be. And we don't always call that a form of violence, but I think we need to look more carefully at what that does to the view of young people who are just not valued enough to make something happen for them, to the view of newer residents who, I have to think that's who Councilmember Allen is mostly thinking about, although he's been here a long time and he knows a lot of people. But when he says the community wants this going forward, he's not talking about older Black residents who've been here a long time and who have generational relationship to that property. He's talking about younger people who just don't want to see an eyesore and who would like their own property to increase in value. And not that that's necessarily a bad goal in life. Everyone wants to feel safe and to have their property, the value of it protected. But what we are valuing is so clear to our young people. And we are committing a form of violence when we constantly say, oh, well, we'll just give this to the developers for $1 and trust that they're going to make everything all better somehow. And it's one more asset that is gone that will never, ever be available for the young people who live here or who might live here in the future, for kids who go to that school, whether they live in the neighborhood or not. There's a lot of traveling in DC. If you're listening from somewhere else, we have a very complicated system where people travel to high schools, especially from different neighborhoods. So they're not necessarily walking. Many are coming on the bus from further east in the city or from around town. And there once was a place where those kids can hang out. And there will not be if this goes through. And as I said, this is not an isolated incident. We have given away prime real estate in downtown DC for a similar deal. We give it away for $1 with our own Office of Racial Equity saying, I can't possibly tell you if that is going to be positive for Black and brown people and lower income people and indigenous people, because we weren't given enough time to study it. And the committee and then the council just shrug and go ahead and give it to a developer, and that property and that space and our chance to make our values explicit in how we take care of our younger people. My kids are long gone away from town, grew up, moved away. They're no longer around to be worried about the Boys and Girls Club, but there are other people who grew up and their own kids are still living here, and they would like for recognition that these are human needs and that we are not even looking at those needs. We are instead just selling to the highest bidder. Not even selling. We're giving property that we bought. The district bought it, and we are now giving it to a developer who isn't even giving us the multi-generational housing that the community asked, affordable housing, or community. We get 2,000 square feet of community serving space, and who even knows what that means? That can be, we've seen it from other developers. It can mean a meeting room that is available on Tuesdays when the moon is blue or something. We do not insist that community assets stay in the community. And I've been already talking a long time about this. I just want to make sure that this is not swept under the rug. I want to thank Councilmember Louis George, Councilmember Alyssa Silverman for speaking out about this. And I do hope that the council, if not this time, then in the future, heeds the kind of thing that Alyssa Silverman is trying to tell them about how we are taking our own tax dollars and spending it on interest and all of these other kind of wacky things that in the end only support developers, don't support our values. And I want to thank Councilmember Louis George for trying to raise some of the issues that were brought to her by community members. And in the last couple of minutes before I close this conversation for now, with the hope that we will have many more voices weighing in on this in the coming weeks, I want to thank Allison Horn, who was the ANC commissioner for this area before the redistricting and before she moved away from the area. So she has been following this for a long time, but again, has been trying to keep this in the forefront. And there are other people who are concerned about community assets. And there are, excuse me, the people who have been working on this in so many different ways for decades. And I do thank every one of them for everything that people tried to do over the years to ensure that a community asset remains a community asset. And I am closing with the hope that we can do better at envisioning ways to make our tax dollars work for the community Excuse me. And with that, I'm still recovering from COVID, so I think I better go ahead and sign off. Thank you for listening, and look for We Act Radio to cover this issue further in the future. And I will sign off by saying this is Virginia Avniel Spatz coming to you from We Act Radio in broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, D.C. Peace.